Let's get a little more on the Mosul offensive. We're joined from Dubai by Oubai Shahbandar. He's a former senior advisor to the US Defense Department. Many thanks for joining us, Oubai. Let's start with this new satellite imagery that has come out by this intel firm, which tells us that Daesh has set up this very strong defense to stop those invading forces. Tell us a bit more about those defenses and how serious are they in stopping the Allied forces from getting in further?
Well, this is part of an established Daesh tactics and procedure where they set up static lines of defenses, whether they're concrete barriers, earth berms, complemented by improvised explosive devices that they set up, that they've strewn along the roadways and the entry points into the neighborhoods in East Mosul and probably throughout the city. ISIS has extensive experience in urban warfare, and we can expect to see ISIS putting that experience to use. It is very clear that ISIS is fighting heavily in the eastern neighborhoods of Mosul, in which the anti-ISIS coalition entered approximately 2 days ago. This means that ISIS is going to fight for every meter in Mosul. And the fight for eastern Mosul has only just begun, and we are already seeing significant amount of casualties from the Iraqi Special Forces and the counterterrorism unit that have entered in the city. Expect Daesh to use their tried experience in the past in urban warfare to use in Mosul, and we're just seeing the fight begin today.
That's interesting because the progress they seem to have made up to this point was relatively quick. So do you expect now that we're really going to see things slow down?
Absolutely. I mean, the progress up to date has been actually ahead of schedule, according to the coalition forces and to the American advisors on the ground. That's because the anti-Daesh forces have been moving in the countryside, in the outskirts of Mosul city proper. Let's not forget that Daesh controls a wide swath of Nineveh province in northwest Iraq. So right now we're seeing the intensified fighting really take place as these forces enter the heavy urban areas in eastern Mosul. So we can expect the advances at this point to slow down significantly as ISIS fights house by house. And let's also not forget that ISIS is very adept at using a tunnel network to ambush and launch flanking attacks against its adversaries. And we've already seen ISIS use those tunnel networks in addition to its earth berms and physical barriers to slow down its adversaries. This is a smart and capable force. They're very adept at urban warfare and asymmetric warfare. And the anti-ISIS forces certainly have a major fight ahead of them as they fight for eastern Mosul.
You seem to be giving the impression that they're going to fight to the bitter end, but we've also heard reports of Daesh fighters having left Mosul and going into Syria, into Raqqa to escape. But we've heard that the leader, Baghdadi, has told its fighters to stay on and fight. I mean, what do you think is the strategy here? Are they going to fight to the bitter end?
Well, look, let's be very clear here. ISIS, Daesh is losing momentum. Momentum is not on its side. It's lost a significant amount of territory in northern Syria at a time when it's fighting in Mosul. In northern Syria, Operation Euphrates Shield just today has made advances in northern Aleppo against Daesh positions. As this is happening, they're losing a significant amount of fighters and casualties in Mosul and Nineveh province. So what we've seen Daesh do in the past is to leave a small group or a certain number of fighters in the city to fight to the last man as they retreat and move other personnel, leadership, and heavy equipment into territory that's firmly in its grasp. So they will absolutely fight to the last man, yet on one hand, they will also move sensitive equipment and senior leadership deeper into its territory for protection as Daesh loses momentum on two fronts simultaneously.
Let's talk about the civilians of Mosul. Do you think post-Daesh, once they've been pushed out, they have as much to fear from the militia groups that have been involved in this fight? Because there's been a lot of concern about the Shia militia groups that have their own agenda when it comes to Mosul.
And that concern is very much well warranted. The fight for Mosul isn't just the fight against Daesh. We have to forget what happens after Daesh is kicked out of Mosul. What happens after Mosul is liberated from Daesh is just as important as the fight that is ongoing today. Who will control Mosul after Daesh is kicked out? Will it be the Shia sectarian militias? Will it be the government forces? Will it be the Kurdish forces? Or will the Sunni Arabs who comprise the majority of the populace of Mosul's nearly 2 million civilians be allowed to control the affairs of their city? And that is the real question here. And there is a very real and warranted concern that Shia militia forces who are led by their own commanders, who do not adhere to a central government and have their own rules that they operate with, may be given a significant amount of power after Mosul is liberated from Daesh. And that is worrying many civilians in the area. And certainly it could potentially even lead to conditions in which Daesh is allowed to return in the future.
Let me ask you one more question. You were advisor to the U.S. Defense Department. Do you think the U.S. should have gotten involved in this battle against Daesh in Mosul before having some sort of plan or strategy for what happens politically in Mosul afterwards?
Well, look, I was in Mosul. I was deployed to Mosul 8 years ago. So what does that tell you here? It tells you that we're fighting, these areas that are being fought against Daesh, this is probably the second or third time that many of these towns and villages have switched hands. Let's not forget, this is the same area where American-led forces and Iraqi forces battled Daesh's predecessor, Al-Qaeda, in Iraq. And many of those leaders have then went on to become senior commanders in Daesh. And what happened is that Daesh was allowed to regroup and was allowed to establish control in an area where Iraqi army forces and Peshmerga forces dissolved and allowed Daesh and set the conditions in which Daesh could operate. Let's also not forget what led Daesh to capture Mosul in the first place. And that was because the international community and Western powers allowed Daesh to expand in eastern Syria and to expand in eastern Aleppo at a time when they could have been stopped at a relatively low cost if military action was taking place at the time. And it's because the West allowed Daesh to implant a firm foothold in eastern and northern Syria 3 years ago that Daesh was able to invade and launch an attack in Mosul and in western Iraq. So there's certainly important for us to look at what led to Daesh's rise in the first place in Mosul, and that all roads lead back to Syria.
Okay, Oubai, many thanks for your time and your thoughts. Oubai Shahbandar, former senior advisor to the U.S. Defense Department.